2024 has come and gone in a blink of an eye, and I don't know what to do with myself. I'm here to do my December wrap up and also do my overall 2024 reading wrap up. I will be going through all the stats from my story graph and also my personal reading spreadsheet as well. They're very basic stats just to see how I did in 2024, and it'll reflect with my reading goals that I posted last week. But let's go through my December reading wrap up first before we wrap up the year. I'll go through all the books that I read in the beginning of December till the end of December. The first book that I read in December is Storm of Secrets and Sorrows by Melissa K. Rorick, which is the second book in the Legacy series. I gave this book 4.25 stars. I'm obsessed with this series. I started Reigns of Shadows and Endings in the end of November while I was away overseas, and I binged through that book, and it's a long book, and I was busy in Malaysia. I loved the first book. So it follows our main character Tessa, who is a fae, and in this world fae are essentially slaves where they were created in order to serve the legacy, and the legacy are descendants of the gods in this world, but they're not direct descendants of the gods. They just have like a drop of blood from the gods, so they have the gods' powers, and Tessa has been chosen as a source for the deadliest legacy house in this world, and she kind of has to navigate through that situation because she never really expected to be in this situation, and she is very much like a wild, untamed, unpredictable type of person, and she's just a very free person. And being tied to a person as a source is basically tying to a legacy so that they can siphon power from you to increase your power reserves. And there's a whole lot of drama, twists, turns, and the romance in this is so angsty and dark, and Melissa K. Rorick does grief and mental health so well in this series, especially because I've read the Lady of Darkness series and that was also really good. It's just that this series has its own uniqueness to it, and Melissa K. Rorick came into her own with this series because with the Lady of Darkness series there's so much familiar tropes in that we've already read in Sarah J. Maas, but with this series it's so different and I ate it up. I love this series so much. I did like the first book compared to the second book because the second book was very much just slow paced, worlds building and finding shit out, that kind of stuff. But it was still so good. I would definitely recommend checking the trigger warnings for this because it's a dark fantasy romance series. The next two books that I read in the month of December is Blood Promise and Spirit Bound by Rochelle Mead. These are book 4 and 5 in the Vampire Academy series, and I am rereading this series with my friend Jess. I randomly just saw this meme or this thing on Instagram and it just made me want to reread Vampire Academy, and I went to Jess and I was like, a reread? And she was immediately on board. Plus she hasn't read Bloodlines before, which is the spin-off series to Vampire Academy. So after finishing the Vampire Academy reread, we're going to get into Bloodlines. I've read Bloodlines but only once and I barely remember it. So very excited to get into the spin-off after we finish our reread of Vampire Academy. So I gave Blood Promise 4.5 stars and then Spirit Bound 4.75 stars. Spirit Bound is definitely my favorite of the series. And Vampire Academy is about our main character Rose, who is a guardian. And guardians in this world are meant to protect the Moroi, which are basically vampire royalties, like a different type of vampires. And then we have Strigoi, which is what the guardians are protecting the Moroi from. And they are like the soulless, vicious vampires who have a taste for Moroi blood. And Rose is guarding her best friend Vasilissa, who is a Moroi. It's really hard to explain this series because the series scope is very large compared to what happens in the first book. There's a lot of magic, there's a lot of world building, and just a lot of character development, and I love Rochelle Mead's portrayal of grief and addiction in this series, especially with Blood Promise. She did such a good job with that and just articulates very well. The atmosphere in this is so good, so nostalgic. I remember reading this back in like when I was 18, and I really do love this series, especially our main character Rose. She is so nuanced and she goes through a lot of things that really develops her character into a more mature, rational thinking person instead of the person that she was. And there is a romance in this which I love so much. It is a bit of a taboo romance. There's an age gap with this, but it's done well in my opinion. It's not creepy deepy. And then we have Spirit Bound, which I said is my favorite of the series, which just takes it up a notch. There's more politics in this because we're in a court setting away from the academy setting that we were in the first 2-3 books, and definitely a lot of development within the magic system as well. I definitely recommend this series if you haven't read it. I think Vampire Academy still holds up. It definitely still has that YA kind of writing, but I think that a lot of the themes that I mentioned before really stands out in this series, and I definitely recommend, if you haven't read Vampire Academy, pick it up. The fourth book that I read in December is A Darkness of Sethanon by Raymond E. Feist. This is the third book in the Magicians, third or fourth book, I can't remember, because Magician, the first book, is actually split into two. It was two books and then he kind of mushed it into one and called it Magician, so I'm not too sure. But in terms of how I read Magician as one book, and then we got second book, and then the third book of the Rift War saga. And I gave this 3.5 stars. It was definitely my least favorite of the series. And if you've seen my weekend vlog that I uploaded recently, I'll leave it somewhere. I was loving the first half of this, but then the second half really lost me, which is such a shame. I really liked the first half of this book because it had so much world building that we didn't really get in the first two books, because the first book focuses on the world building in like another world. Second book was just all plot, and then the third book, that's where the world building for the kingdom of Mikemia came in, and I really appreciate it. And it had a lot of references to the upcoming series that I might read, because Raymond E. Feist has this whole universe of the Rift War, and I'm very excited to get into it. I was buddy reading this with my good friends Abby and Sam. The thing that I didn't like about the latter half is because when everything was coming into a head and we were fighting the enemy, and there was a lot of magic solutions that were going on, but the magic itself was never explained, and I never really noticed it so much. But especially in this book, the magic just was never explained, and it's definitely very frustrating because the author is just saying like, this is what happened and that's it. And I would like more explanations, just personally. And while I really like the world building and the character developments, I thought it was really odd to have that in the third book, because when you think of a third book, it's more a lot like plot and wrapping things up and tying up loose ends. But this one was just creating more loose ends, and it was all really weird, but I, again, really appreciate it. So hopefully we see some of the loose ends get tied in like a different series or something. And another thing that I didn't like in the second half is that the battle scene, the first battle, was very cut and dry battle scene. There wasn't a lot of twists and turns, and it wasn't very engaging, so I just felt bored most of the time, and I was like, why is this so dry? And I didn't really appreciate that, so that's why I got 3.5 stars. I still really like this series overall because of the characters in this. We follow them since they were a little child in the first book. I definitely want to continue on with the other series that Raymond E. Feist has written, because I want to see how our characters are doing. This series definitely classifies as a classic fantasy series, and the writing does show that. It was published in the 80s, I believe, but I still really enjoyed it, and it reminded me of Robin Hobb in a way, even though I've never read Robin Hobb. But a lot of people describe Robin Hobb as cozy, and you kind of follow these characters from the beginning to the end, and I feel the same way about this Rift War saga so far. The fifth book that I read in December is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. This is the first book to a YA new adult, I think, fantasy duology, and this is a historical fantasy set in Cairo. We follow our main character Inez, who has found out that her parents died recently through a letter. She's really devastated, and she also got a unknown golden ring from her father for safekeeping, and her parents went on a expedition and are presumed dead, and Inez goes to Cairo to see her uncle, who told her that her parents are dead. But instead of actually seeing her uncle when she arrives, he sent his assistant Wit, who is definitely modeled after Brendan Fraser. This was comped as The Mummy meets Death on the Nile, very surface level. But anyway, Inez is set to find out what happened to her parents and the origin of this mysterious ring with Wit and her uncle. I gave this book 3.75 stars. I really liked it. I really thought that I wasn't wasn't going to like it because of historical fantasy, and historical fantasies don't usually agree with me. But because this was majority just Egyptian mythology, it canceled out historical fantasy for me, and I really, really liked the Egyptian mythology. And I expected this to be action-packed, because if you're telling me this is like The Mummy, I'm expecting it to be action-packed, but it wasn't at all. And I wasn't disappointed because we were, again, getting a lot of Egyptian mythology and a lot of theories to it, different things, and I just enjoyed reading about that and following that. And we also have a romance in this as well between Inez and Wit. It was enemies to lovers, sort of. It was like, will they, won't they? A lot of angst, a lot of drama. I really, really enjoyed that as well. What I had a problem with was that I feel like it wasn't fully developed. Like Inez as a character, her relationship with her uncle, and even her relationship with Wit, I felt like it was missing something. There wasn't more of it. And there were a lot of repetitive scenes or repetitive dialogue in this that could have been cut down and put more of development into that. There's definitely a cliffhanger at the end of this book that I'm excited to see how it ends in the second book. I'm not expecting it to be that action-packed anyway, but there was quite a bit of action, like 10% at the end of the book, which makes sense. It's the end of the book. So I'm excited to pick up the second book once it's available at my library. The sixth book that I read in the month of December is Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. I love Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and I was scared to pick this up because this is a prequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven, so it's set in the 1800s. I'm not a huge fan of historical fantasy, and I gave this 3 stars. I was right. It's a prequel. It's following different characters. It's following characters in the past that I don't know anything about, and it's such a short book for me to be invested in the characters and care about what they're doing. But it was nice to read this because I know now the origins of Her Majesty's Royal Coven and how they came to be. But don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed this in a way. I just, again, wish I had more development because it was a lot of time jumps, and also you looked at 2 different timelines. One is before the event and one is after the event. I'm not versed with my history, but I'm pretty sure it's to do with Mary Antoinette's sister Anne Boleyn. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know anything about English history. I'm so sorry. But it's based loosely on true events, but included in like the lore of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Her Majesty's Royal Coven is basically a coven of witches that is a government in itself, and it rules the witches in the country and deals with problems that arises. This is kind of the origin story of that. And again, it was fine. I like this edition a lot, and I cannot wait for the 3rd book in Her Majesty's Royal Coven series because I'm interested in that, not this. I would highly recommend that series, the Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I love it. I love anything to do with witches, and that one just gave me a lot of Charmed vibes because of the camaraderie between the witches and the friendship and the sisterhood. I definitely recommend the series. I really, really hope the 3rd book gets announced for 2025. Please, God. And the last book I read in December, and the last book that I read for 2024, is Tempest of Wrath and Vengeance by Melissa K. Rourke. This is the 3rd book in the Legacy series. I was so excited to pick up this book. This is the last book that is published so far. The 4th book is coming out in August of 2025. Cannot wait that long. Honestly, I gave this book 5 stars. This is what solidified my love for the Legacy series and for Melissa K. Rourke. It was so good. The twists and turns, the development of the romance, the politics in this, the twists and turns. Did I mention that? It was just such a wild time. I had such a good time, but such a hard time. I was stressy depressy. It was just the thing that I want in a fantasy romance. I just love when a fantasy romance is able to just sweep me away and take me to this world and makes me feel so many feelings for these characters and the things that are happening. And I'm like, it's not that deep, but it is, you know? Anyway, I really love this series so much. I cannot wait for book 4 to come out. And now that we've wrapped up December, let's wrap up 2024 as a whole. And in 2024, I read 70 books. I also DNF'd 8 books, which I will talk about in a separate video, including my disappointing reads of 2024. I have my handy dandy laptop here to tell you the stats. So I read 31,681 pages, and my average pages were 453 pages. And looking at my Storygraph stats, 61% of the books I read were between 300 and 500 pages, and 30% were 500 plus pages, and 9% were less than 300 pages, because as we've seen with Queen Bee, I'm not a fan of short books, so it tracks. And it takes about 9 days to finish a book. And as I said in my goals video, I definitely want to get back into the reading habit, so hopefully we'll see the average time decrease. Genre-wise, as you can see, it is a pink circle, and I have read 100 100% fiction, I'm not bothered. I read for fun. Non-fiction a lot of time doesn't give me fun unless a memoir catches my eye, and in 2024 it hasn't, and that is fine. I'm not bothered about it. And with my genre breakdown, Storygraph tells me fantasy and romance are my top genre, which also tracks. My spreadsheet gives me further breakdown. 30 of the books are fantasy books, 17 books are fantasy romance, 17 are contemporary romances, 5 books are thriller mystery, and then 1 was a YA contemporary. In terms of age range, my spreadsheet has told me I have read 54 adult books, 14 YA books, and 2 middle grades. In terms of where I source my books, 41 of my books are from my physical TBR, 11 are library books, 10 are from KU, and 7 are just from my Kindle TBR. And in terms of when the books were published, 34 of the books that I read were backlist, so 2022 and back. 22 books are 2024 new releases, 14 books were 2023 releases. So as I said in my goals video, I would like my backlist books to be up, and also in correlation with my physical TBR also to be up, because a lot of my books in my physical TBR are backlist books. So hopefully we see that number increase next year. And now we get to star ratings. So let's go through the breakdowns. 2 books I did not rate because they were Harry Potter rereads, so I didn't want to rate them. And then 1 book was 2.5 stars, 7 3.5 stars, 8 3.5 stars, 3 3.75 stars, 23 4 stars, my lucky number, 4 4.25 stars, 9 4.5 stars, 4 4.75 stars, and 9 5 stars, which gives me an average of 4.06 stars, which tracks because there's 23 4-star ratings. And that also attests to the quality over quantity thing I was going for in 2024, which I am glad for. And other miscellaneous stats, Storygraph tells me my longest book is The Magician by Raymond E. Feist, and that is 865 pages. My shortest book is Rosie and the Dreamboat by Sally Thorne, that was 44 pages. And then my most read author is Melissa K. Rorick, which again, I read 8 books of. So it tracks. 2024 was definitely the year of Melissa K. Rorick. I'm so glad I discovered her and read her books. I'm going to be meeting her in May for the Ball Gowns and Books events in Sydney, hence why I started Melissa K. Rorick in the first place, because I knew I was going to meet her. And I will be going through some other fantasy romance authors and reading their works before going to Babe. So I'm excited. I'm so glad that I found Melissa K. Rorick and went on a journey. God, it was a journey, and I'm so glad. And overall, reflecting on my reading in 2024, I feel like I've read good books, but I don't feel like I found all-time favorites, with the exception of 1, and we'll go through that in my best books of 2024. But I'm glad with the books that I've read because, again, quality over quantity. Hopefully 2025 will give me more favorites of all time, and also I hope that I read more backlist books for my physical TBR as well. 2024 in general was a mixed year. I had the lowest of lows in 2024, scared myself, and it was also a great year because I found a space of my own. So I'm glad 2024 happened, which is a weird thing to say, but I'm sticking with it. And 2025 is going to be a year where, now that I've found my feet, hopefully I can start running again. Not literally, metaphorically, because I don't like to run. Anyway, I'm going to go now because I've rambled too much. Let me know down in the comments how many books you've read in 2024 and what you're looking forward to in 2025. And also let me know what was the best book that you read in December. If you've read Melissa K. Rorick, also let me know down in the comments. Let's chat, because I am a chatty catty when it comes to Melissa K. Rorick. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later. Bye!